Welcome back to Forgotten Hollywood. So, I haven't been recording in a while, and that was mostly due to the fact that I had a baby in October, so I was not wanting to deal with videos immediately before and immediately after she was born. And then I'm now preparing to move to a new recording space, and I wasn't planning to make any videos until after I moved into the new recording space, which is why some of my stuff is boxed up here. But I was seeing a lot of things about the new Captain America movie making $100 million and people thinking that that means box office success. It really, really doesn't. It got me thinking about how people compare how much old movies made versus new movies by doing an adjustment for inflation. But this almost always favors the current films versus the older films. The older it gets, the more of a discrepancy you're going to have. There are three main reasons why adjusting for inflation does not accurately portray how much money an old movie made. The first of these is ticket prices. The cost of tickets has not really kept up with inflation until fairly recently. In 1935, the average cost of a movie ticket was 25 cents. Adjusted for inflation, that's $5.80 today. In 1955, 20 years later, the average cost of a movie was 60 cents, or $7.88 today. 30 years after that, in 1985, the average cost of a movie ticket was $3.55. Or $10.48 today. The average cost of a movie ticket today is $11.31. So you can see that from 1985 to today, the cost of a movie is only about $1 more. But from 1935 to today, the cost of a movie has more than doubled. The second major reason that it is an unfair comparison is the number of showings. Back in the day, most theaters only had one screen. And this was true until around, I think, the 40s, that they started to add 2 screens. And in order to add 2 screens, and this is why it wasn't common, is they actually had to buy the building next door and renovate it to have an auditorium. So you would have a box office, and then people would have 2 screens, 2 concession stands, 2 sets of staff. It was very expensive, so most theaters only had 1 screen. But additionally, until the 1950s, even the theaters that had 2 screens only showed 1 movie at a time. This is why if you watch things like I Love Lucy and they say, hey, what's playing at the Roxy? And they would say 1 movie, because that was all that was playing at that one theater. This would cause problems for the movie theaters themselves, because you would have a movie that's still making money, but you have to pull it because a new movie is coming out that's probably going to make a lot of money too. And so you had to balance, what movies do we buy? What movies do we pass on? How long do we keep them in the theaters? In 1942, Bambi, which is widely considered a classic now, was pulled from at least one major theater after only 2 weeks because it didn't meet sales goals. Now, I'm not sure if it was still showing in other theaters, but I know that Roy contacted Walt and said, we fell short by $4,000. I can't get them to keep it another week. So films would have very limited releases, even major ones. Gone with the Wind, one of the top grossing films of all time, ran for 6 weeks. Gone with the Wind broke records in 6 weeks. You would basically have to take one of the top grossing films and only look at the first 6 weeks to compare it to Gone with the Wind and see how well it did. It wasn't until 1957 that a guy in Ottawa, Canada named Nat Taylor was like, wait a minute, I have 2 screens. This movie's making money. I don't really want to stop showing it, but this other movie's coming out. What if I played one movie on this screen and the other movie on this screen? And when he started doing that, other theaters with 2 screens started going, wait a minute, we can do that? And so that caught on. Then in 1965, another theater opened with 3 screens. And in 1969 came the first recognizable multiplex, which had 6 screens. And the rest is history. The third and final point I want to make is the difference between distribution fees and box office gross. Today, they count box office gross. How many tickets were sold? How much money was made? Take the recent big box office movie, Captain America, Brave New World, $100 million opening weekend. Well, opening weekend was actually 5 days long. If you look at the 3 days, it was $88 million. And that was box office gross, all ticket sales. But if you go back to, say, Cinderella 1950, and they say, oh, this is how much money it made, it's counting only the distribution fees, which is roughly 1/3 of ticket sales. So you have to multiply what the movie made in rentals by 3 to figure out what the ticket sales are. Whereas today, it is counting all ticket sales and not how much the studio is making, because the studio is only making about 1/3 of that. So it has reversed. Instead of multiply by 3 for ticket sales, it's divide by 3 to find out what the studio is taking home. So that $88 million take home is actually only about $29.3 million that the studio is making. So that's not great considering the budget was $380 million. For a practical application, let's look at Casablanca. Released in 1942, it made $3.2 million in rentals during its initial release. A moderate success. Not a top box office draw, but a moderate success. So I think it's a pretty decent gauge for this. Now, adjusted for inflation, which when people say, how much did Casablanca make? They would say, $62.3 million today. That's just taking the $3.2 million and adjusting. However, if you take into account that the rentals is only 1/3 of what the film actually brought in, the number back in 1942 was $9.6 million. And when you adjust that for inflation, it becomes $187 million. Then you look at the average ticket price, which was 25 cents back in 1942, or $5.80 now, which is a little less than half of what it costs today. But let's just say half for the sake of this. So adjusted for inflation, ticket price, and rentals, Casablanca made $374 million. That is 6 times the amount that people will quote when they initially adjust for inflation. This is why adjusting for inflation for older films does not work, because there are so many factors to take into account. Thanks for watching. What's your favorite classic movie? It might be fun to see how much it actually made in today's numbers. Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, and I will catch you next time.